Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Digital Photo Mentor Live, the #1 place on the internet to edit photos using Lightroom, Photoshop, Luminar AI, and have an awesome time doing it. My name is Darlene from Digital Photo Mentor, and today I'll be editing subscriber photos using my approach and my techniques. I'll edit the photos as if they were my own, and you'll see how to fix a problem or improve the photo, or how I just edit it to my taste and style. If you'd like to see how I would edit your photos, just fill in the form to upload your images and answer a few questions. The link to submit your images is below in the description area. I will be doing this on a regular basis, so if you didn't get your images in today, you have a chance to give it a try next week or the week after that. You can also submit your photo editing questions, and I'll try to answer them here in this live, or perhaps I will do an additional Q&A photo editing session if there's lots of questions and there's demand for that. So without further ado, let's get started. So I just want to check the chat. Let's see where everybody is from. So I've got Vivian's from St. Louis. Hi, Vivian. Nancy. Yes, we are here. She's in Ontario. Phil, I've got your image queued up, Phil. So we're doing this. So maybe I'll do yours first if you can't stay long. We've got Mike in Santa Clara. Awesome. Glad to have you guys here. One thing, if you've never used Luminar before, there is a coupon and the discount code if you want to check it out down below in the description. It's Digital Photo Mentor is the coupon code to get $10 off. And actually this Easter weekend, if you're watching this live on April 3rd, Skylum is running a sale until April the 6th, I believe. And there's lots of stuff on sale there. So you can grab Aurora HDR or Luminar or any of their extras as well if you want some extra looks and things. And I'm going to be demonstrating all of that today and how you can use Luminar as a standalone program if you're new to editing or as a plugin. Right? So let's dig in. I'm going to slip over here to my screen share and get over into Lightroom. There we go. Okay, so I wanted to show you just first of all quickly a before and after. I've worked on a couple of images already just to kind of give you an inspiration. So this is one that was submitted by Tom Murphy, and I'm going to show you how to make this with this image. Right, so this was the original image. I did some editing in Lightroom, and then I pulled it over into Luminar and did a sky replacement and a few other color style things. Right, so that's just one example of what we're going to be working on today. So I've got several images submitted. You guys did great. I've got a few also that I'm not able to edit, and I want to show you, just run through a few of those quickly. And so if you want to resubmit images for next week, just make sure that you are sending me images that I can work on. So this one I can't do because the image is too small. It's only 960 pixels. It's very, very small, and it's a JPEG, right? So this is not the original camera file. If you're shooting JPEG, that's fine. Just make sure that you send me the absolute original that came out of the camera. So it's larger, and it also has the camera information, so that when I call up this little thing up the top here, let me turn on my pointer. Right, so you can see this information here at the top. Susanna submitted this image, but there's no camera information, so there's no exposure information or any of that. That's called metadata. Right, so make sure that you send the original camera file so it's large enough for me to edit and it's got all the information there. Okay. The other thing that I'll be doing as we go along is if there is something that I can suggest to you to help you actually take better photos as well, I will be doing that. right? This one I won't be editing either because it's simply out of focus, right? The fence here, if I zoom in, is more in focus than the beautiful tiger, right? So I can't fix out of focus. You can enhance some details and you can get things like Topaz Sharpen AI, which will help, but it's always better to go back and get a better, sharper shot in camera. So if I look at the information here, it looks like the focus was just missed on this one, right? Similar to this one here, the deer is not in focus and he's beyond the point of being able to sharpen in a software. Some other images that I received had some exposure issues. So this one is really overexposed. And you can tell because if we go into the develop module, this is Lightroom, the areas that you see here in red are clipping or off the top of the histogram on the right side, which means that they are overexposed. And when you're shooting a JPEG, there's no detail there to be had. So even if I pull this information down and darken it, there's no detail in their shirts. Right? Even if I continue to darken it, it just gets muddy. Okay, so this one is not one that can be fixed. To some degree, I can probably pull it down and darken it, but when you get into a situation like this, it's best if you are shooting raw to go from the raw file because you'll have more latitude to correct it, or you could even try switching to black and white because often that will give you a better recovered look on an image that is lacking detail in the highlights. So you can give that a go if you have images that are really overexposed. Right? Likewise, images that are really underexposed, and you can see this here on the histogram, there's basically nothing here. If you're not familiar with how to read the histogram, maybe Rob can pop in a note in the chat there about how to read the histogram. That's the When Your Snow is Gray article on the website. We'll explain a little bit about how to use the histogram when you're shooting and when you're editing, because I'm going to refer to that a lot today. So this one is extremely underexposed. If I bring it into the develop module, you can see that it's about 4 stops underexposed. And having shot aperture priority, I'm not actually sure how you managed to achieve this. So if, Jan, if you want to give me some information by email, I'm actually confused as to how you set the aperture, and the camera should be setting the shutter speed to give you a good exposure, right? So you weren't using exposure compensation or anything, so I'm a little bit confused as to how that actually occurred. But this is not one that's going to be salvageable because it's at a high ISO to begin with, and you're going to end up with a lot of noise. Okay, so when you start with an image that's really underexposed, even at a low ISO, you're going to see a lot of noise if you try and push it up. Okay. Likewise with this one, it's not quite as underexposed, but still, you know, upwards of 2 stops underexposed, and the owl is a little on the blurry side, so it looks like maybe the focus was missed here. Yeah, his feet are sharper than his head. So Rob, if you could find the I'm putting Rob to work here, Getting Sharper Images article on the website, that will help with a few people's issues with focus. So give that a read if you're having trouble focusing your images. Here's another one that is overexposed and the sky is completely blown out, right? So if we look at the, if we look at the clippings, okay, you can see that this has got no detail. So even if I pull it down, it's the best I can do is it's going to make something muddy looking, and you start to get these weird, you see how it sort of looks. I'm going to zoom in even more here so you can really see it. So what I'm looking at here is it goes from white to this weird blue and this other gray, but it's choppy, right? So it's really pixelated. This is an extreme example of what's called banding. So if you get a sky where the color is not going smoothly from one gradation to the other, it's called banding, and that usually means you're trying to pull the image too far, and that is definitely the case when you're working with a JPEG, right? So again, if you can shoot raw in the camera, if you're not comfortable with shooting 100% raw at this point, try and shoot both, okay? And then if you want me to give your image an edit or try editing it, I'll have more data to work with, all right? And the last one I'm going to look at a couple more in terms of ones that I didn't choose to edit because there's not really much I can do here to improve the image, okay? So the idea behind image editing or processing is that you want to use it to enhance what's already there and not fix something, okay? Occasionally you could fix things like removing things from the background, or like here I'm trying to crop it, okay, because there really is the picture that you wanted to take. You don't want to have all that bright stuff around it because it's actually caused glare on the image and you can't see, right? So on this one, if you use a dehaze slider, you see how it brings up the blacks and it's affecting the histogram. When you increase the blacks or use the dehaze slider, you'll get a lot more contrast and punch in the image, right? See how this one is sort of flat and flaring a little bit? And this one with just the blacks and the dehaze gives it a lot more punch. So that's where I would start with this one. Okay, I am going to go into Phil's image here because I know he said he can't stay real long, so I want to make sure we get to his because he's got a fun image for me to work on. So I'm just going to skip ahead to Phil's, and I'm actually going to do his in Luminar. Okay, so this is your image, Phil. Are you ready for it? I've already played with this one in Luminar because I thought this would be a perfect candidate for a sky replacement. So as I mentioned, you can use Luminar as a plugin for Lightroom or plugin for Photoshop, or also for a plugin for Photos if you're using Mac Photos program, and you can pull it from there into Luminar and then back again. Right, so I got lots of resources going on here today because I'm streaming live. So all right, so let me find Phil's so there's the sale I told you about, right? So as soon as I open Luminar, it's telling me about the Easter sale, right? So if you do want to go and grab any of these things, okay, where did Phil's image go? Ah, there we go. It's at the top. Okay, so this is what I created with your image, Phil, right? So tell me what you think in the chat, and then I'm going to undo some of this and show you how I got here. All right, so this is the kind of thing that you cannot do in Lightroom because of that sky replacement. I could do lots of edits and probably get similar to the foreground, but that sky is not something that you can do in Lightroom, okay? If you want to open the image from Lightroom into Luminar as a plugin, you simply right-click it, and then you say Edit In. You choose Edit In, and then choose your plugin of choice. I have several. So I've choose Luminar AI. Now, if I've done any edits in Lightroom, I'm going to choose Edit with a copy of Lightroom Adjustments, and then open it. Okay, so when I do that, it's going to open it in Luminar, but I'll get a slightly different interface because when you open it in Luminar, you do the edits there, and then when you save it, it comes back into Lightroom, okay, but it's not editable again back in Luminar. You would do a new edit. So the reason I opened it here is because I can go back to any of these things that I've done and redo them or tweak them a little bit, okay? All right, so I'm going to go into the edit panel here. And actually how I started with this one is you can see down below here, it's actually using the Toscana edited. This is a template, right? So it's using the Toscana template, and that is one that you'll find. I put it in my favorites, okay? So it's called Toscana, and I'm just going to click on it to show you what it does. So a template is something that applies to the whole image, and when I clicked on it, this is what I got. So the original image to that in one click. And then what I did was I just adjusted the colors and things to be more warmer and less pink, right? So that's why it's showing me that it's been edited, right? So now I can also save this as a new template if I want. So the cool thing about Luminar AI is it shows you which things have been applied. If you can see, there's a little dot next to all of these things, okay? Yes, I can do a side-by-side. I can't do a side-by-side, Janet, but I can do this type of thing. So I can do a split screen, right? So you can see what's happening there, right? Big difference in the contrast and the color boost, as well as the sky, right? So I can see that Enhance AI has been applied. And you can also just turn off each of these things individually, right? So it's punching up the contrast. But I'm just going to go back here in my history and go all the way back to the original, right? And then I'm going to follow the process that I used to get to that final image. So I have one in my templates. So my templates are the ones that I've edited or saved myself. Favorites are ones that are existing in the catalog that I liked, so I've saved as a favorite. And these ones at the top are ones that Luminar suggests for your image, right? So it's suggesting ones that are related to scenery, overcast skies, and easy landscapes, right? So the one that I found was the Toscana, and I have an edited version of it because I always thought it was too pink. So I edited my own version and I made it more sort of less pink, more orange. Okay, so that's the starting point. You can also dial down these templates just by dialing this little slider at the bottom to lessen the effect, right? But I like the effect. I'm just going to go and tweak it a bit more. Okay, so I'm going back into the tools, and Sky Enhancer darkens the sky. I'm going to come back to that one after I do some of the other things. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is sort of correct the tint less pink. So the light panel is where you'll find the temperature and tint. I'm going to give it more yellow and less pink. Start there. Okay, so we're getting closer to what I had a minute ago. You can also bump up this slider, which is great. So Smart Contrast gives you sort of a really nice overall punch. And one of the things I recommend in any program, whichever program you're using to edit, is take the sliders to an extreme and then come back to the other extreme and see what it's doing, and then settle somewhere in the middle, okay? If you want to see the histogram in Luminar, that's up here under the View menu, Show Histogram. And now with the latest update 2, right, which has reflections, and I'll show you that in a second, right, the histogram stays when you move from image to image, right? A couple of the other things that have been applied with that preset or the template was structure, okay? So structure adds like a really nice, it's kind of like clarity if you're used to using Lightroom or Photoshop, right? So it gives you a bit of that punch overall, so that's working really nicely. Okay, the color panel does all kinds of things. So this one isn't been used, but I'm going to tweak the colors a little bit. Okay, so it allows you to adjust the general vibrance and saturation, or it can go into the HSL panel, which is hue, saturation, and luminance. Luminance being brightness, right? So the hue allows me to shift colors. Okay, so I'm going to use orange as an example here because I think that these rocks and the ground are orange, but they look a bit more pink. So I'm going to shift it to the right, which is towards more yellow or green. And you can see that, in fact, this has shifted. Okay? Because that template was shifted more to pink, I'm just going to correct that one. And then let's just see what some of the others do. Okay, so yellow changes the foliage. So I'm okay with that one. Let's see what red does. Okay, so red is also in the land. I might give it a little bit more red. And then we can even try shifting the blues if we want the sky to be a different color of blue, or if we want the green to be more towards yellow. If you want to create fall out of a summer image, this is where you would go to shift the greens more towards orange, okay? And then we can do things like adjusting the saturation if we want more saturation in the green or less saturation in the sky or more. So this gives you a really great control. Okay, now these types of controls, the HSL panel, you do have in Lightroom as well, but the benefit of this one is that you can actually mask it or choose to apply it only to certain areas. Okay, you do not have that option in Lightroom. You'd have to go to Photoshop for that. So one of the things that about editing software in general is that you can do all of these things in Lightroom, except for the sky replacement, and Photoshop, right? But often they take longer, and you need to really know how to use certain tools in the program, okay? They're generally more complex in Photoshop than what you'll find in Luminar, right? Especially when you get really close with one click, right? So I'm just going to brighten the greens a little bit, so that's luminance. And one thing to note is that green and yellow, you'll see that that's affecting the trees, right? But often there's a lot of yellow in foliage as well, okay? So if you find that the green slider is not working, try the yellow slider as well on your foliage. Okay, so that's a color shift. And you can just use this toggle here to turn it off and on, that effect or that tool, to see what that tool is doing, right? Details is another one that's slightly different than what you'll find in Lightroom, because in Lightroom you only have sharpen and clarity. Here you have the ability to adjust small, medium, or large details. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here and show you what the small details does. Okay, so small details picks up really sort of even a lot of pixelation. So I don't use that one a lot. However, there is a trick with small details because it will help sharpen your images if they are not as sharp as you'd like them to be. Okay, and likewise, you have the ability to mask. Okay, so what masking does is if I only want to sharpen the trees and not the sky, I can actually say, okay, I don't want to add any of this stuff to the sky, right? And I'm just going to take it a little bit farther. Again, often when I'm editing as an example for you like this, I will take it to extreme so that you can see it more obviously, and then I will pull it back to something where I would leave it for the editing, okay? So once I activate this mask, I can paint it in, I can use a radial mask or a gradient mask. I'm going to paint it in, and you have the choice of painting it in or out. Okay, so this is the erase tool here. So I'm going to use the erase tool, dial the opacity of this brush down a little bit, and then you have these little two circles. Okay, so what the two circles mean is the softness of the brush. Okay, so the outer one is the limit of where the brush finishes, and the inner one is the start. So it sort of fades in that zone, okay, between those two circles. If I want less fade, you notice I turn the softness down. Now you see the circles are almost touching, okay? You can also do these with keyboard shortcuts, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so you can use your square bracket keys to make the whole thing bigger or smaller. Okay, so left square bracket smaller, right is larger. And I'm just going to paint in the sky here. Now, as soon as I click, you get this red, this is the mask, okay? So wherever it's red, this tool or the sharpening is applying, okay? This detail is sharpening. So I don't want it as much on the sky, okay? So I've done a kind of a really quick job there, but now you can see what's happening. If I turn on the mask, that's the / key, it's sharpening everything except the sky, okay? Because I don't want the sky to look over pixelated, and often when you sharpen things that are smooth like the sky, you get too much pixelation, okay? So now I'm just going to pull these back to somewhere in the middle that I have, okay? So when I turn that off, you can see that it's sharpening the sky, the trees in the foreground and not the clouds. And I could probably remove it from these back mountains as well, or even part way from these back mountains, right? Because they're a bit hazier in the distance, they wouldn't be as sharp, okay? So you want it to keep a realistic looking image with your edits. Landscape tool. This is a fun one to use on particularly landscapes. So it gives you the dehaze tool that we looked at in Lightroom already. Golden hour is a fun one because it literally turns on the sun and makes it more golden. So that's doing a really nice thing, but I'm not going to go quite so far with it. Foliage enhancer is another one that pulls out those colors out of the foliage, including grass. But I find that out of the default, it comes out really sort of neon green. So that's where you want to go to the advanced settings down here and dial it a bit more yellow, and then go back, dial it down. Okay, so remember, go to extreme, see what it's doing, adjust it, and then put it back where you want it. Okay, so what this one is doing is giving me a really nice yellow glow and really picking up the green of that landscape. Okay, so you can see it really coming into view now. So let's just do a before and after. Okay? So we're getting close to what I had. Now I want to just cover this sky replacement, and then I'm going to move on to another image here. Okay, so it's chosen a particular sky that works really well with this image because the light was coming from this direction. So you always want to make sure that you match the lighting direction and the quality of light. Okay, so there's no bright sun in this particular sky, and there's no sun or shadows in the foreground, so it matches. Right. Inside of the settings on the sky replacement, I can do things like adjust the sky up and down. Okay, so the vertical offset, or I can move it left to right. I can also adjust the mask refinement. So if it's not picking up all these, notice how it picked up all the little spots in between the trees, and right out of the gate, just with the defaults, I don't even have to adjust anything. Okay, it's a beautiful match. Then I'm going to go down to scenery lighting. Now this is the one that really works great because when you put a new sky in, the sky has a lot of pink in it. Okay? So if I increase the relight strength, it's going to match the rest of the image with the sky a little bit better. And you can also match the color saturation. Okay? So I'm going to go somewhere in the middle on this one as well. Now there's a new reflection slider. Okay, so there is water here, and you can see that as I bring it up, it does increase the amount of color showing up in the water, and it does take into account the fact that this water is rippled. Okay. Last thing I'm going to add here is under the sky adjustments is some atmospheric haze. So taking this one all the way to the top, you'll see that it sort of adds like a little horizon haze, right? As if there was heat or even smog, and it sort of softens the colors in the sky. And I think that increasing that matches better with the original, okay, and it's not quite so punchy in the background. You can also do things like add grain to your sky or defocus it so that if your background is out of focus and you put a sky in that's in focus, it's not going to match. So it's always going back to making sure that things match and make sense, okay? Another tool that I use a lot in Luminar is this super contrast. This is under the professional tools, right? I'm going to adjust the highlight contrast. Now see what happened immediately is it pulled more color out of that sky, right? So I pull this one up to the middle, and then I just sort of see, okay, left is brighter, right is darker, and it's having a nice effect on the water as well. Look at how now the color is picking up in the water. Right, so I might actually like to keep it there, but I don't want so much of that in the sky. Once again, go back to my mask, and I'm just going to remove maybe half of it from the sky. Okay, because remember, it's only affecting the highlights at this point, so it shouldn't affect the trees. Okay, that looks great. So let's see what I've done with that. Darken that water down and the sky a little bit. Okay, perfect. I can also play with shadow contrast. These are all tools that add a lot of boost and punch to the image that was first out of the box a little bit flat. Okay, so let's take another look. We'll do the slider this time. Okay, so original image, sky's washed out, and again, if you had used a raw file, you might have been able to recover some of that sky. Or in this case, you might have had to bracket and use HDR. But look what I was able to create just using Luminar. Okay? One of the last things I would do here is actually erase or fix this part at the top here. This little bit of sky bugs me. Okay? So I'm going to use the erase tool. And again, Lightroom has a similar cloning tool. But I find that it's not very good, actually, if you're dealing with something like this. So you'd have to go to Photoshop to do a really good job. So I'm just going to paint over this area. And I want to cover a little bit of the ground around it. Because what this tool does is it analyzes everything that I've painted here. And it tries to fill in that area from recognizing what's outside of it. Okay, so let's just click erase and see what kind of a job it does. I did this earlier and it did a really nice job. Okay, so let's just see what happens. I'm going to check the chat. Boom! Look at that. Okay, so it actually filled in the rock and the mountain here. I could not tell that that was not like that originally, right? So there we have our final image, okay? Let's just see if we have any questions in the chat over here. So I have two monitors, so you're going to see me looking off to the side here. All right, so we got thumbs up from Phil. Cool, change the colors of the season. Yes. Question. Do you have to have Lightroom or Photoshop to use Luminar? No, you don't, Janet. You can use it as a standalone, and that's how I'm using it right now, okay? If I was using it as a plugin, excuse me, I wouldn't actually see this export button right here. I would see a button that says update or save. I can't remember what it says. And then it would save the image and take it back to Lightroom, okay? So I'll do a different one with that example, okay? Now the sky bugs you. See, I told you, get rid of that little bit of sky, Phil. All right, so that's Phil's image, right? I wanted to try and get to several images today, so let's carry on and do a few more. This one, let's see. There was a few that I wanted to do in Lightroom and a few that I wanted to do in Luminar, right? This one's from Sergio. So this one was really interesting to me because the sky is really dramatic and there's a lot of potential that editing can bring that out, okay? So remember I talked about editing as opposed to fixing things. You can use it to just enhance what's there, right? So one thing that I will notice, first of all, is that the histogram is very flat. Okay, so when you look at it, it's not touching either end. That means there's no white and there's no black, okay? That's easily fixed in processing, okay? Let's take a look at the rest of his settings. Okay, so Olympus, okay, great image, great camera. So let's just continue with this. Okay, so a couple of quick, I'll do this one in Lightroom, okay? A couple of quick clicks here and tricks is if you go to the white slider, okay, that's going to affect the far part of the image, right? And you'll notice that if I hover my mouse over this slider, I don't know if you can see it or not, the part of the histogram, watch up here, okay? So when I put my mouse there, okay, it kind of comes out as light gray or a lighter gray. And the same thing when I put my mouse over the slider, okay? Quick trick to get what's called the endpoints adjusted is hold the shift key and double click the word whites, okay? So now do you see what happened? I'm going to undo it and do it again. It put whites to 61 plus, and what it did was it made the graph stretched out so that it's touching the edge, okay? What that means is you now have a pure white point, okay? I'm going to do it one more time. So shift, double click, and if I want to check that, another trick is to hold your Alt Option key, click the slider, and if you want to set the white point manually, so what you're seeing now is anything that's clipping, so there's nothing clipping, it's all black. Take it further, okay, until you see some clipping, so I'm going to the right, and then just bring it back to the left until there's no clipping, so we end up right back where we were at 61, okay? So you can see that the shift double click did a great job. So I'm going to do the same thing on the blacks. Okay, now look at what immediately, all I've done is two sliders, and see how much more punch that image has. The other thing that happens when you increase the blacks is the saturation increased. So you can see that the sky and the rainbow is a lot punchier color. Right? Next thing I'm going to do is crop this image. I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts. Okay? So R gets me into the crop tool right away. And I'm going to do a freeform crop to get rid of a lot of this foreground. Okay? Because what's happening is the sky here is really the subject of this image, and a third of this image is all beach, and there's nothing really interesting happening here. When you have a lot of foreground in your image, it feels like as a viewer it's far away, like you have to go a long way to get to the subject. So I'm going to do it something like that. Okay, the other thing is that the little hut here, probably a swim hut, and the rainbow are perfectly almost centered in the image. Let's see what happens if we just take a little bit off the right. Okay, now look, you see this grid overlay is a rule of thirds. Okay, so it's dividing your image into thirds vertically and horizontally. Now you can see the hut is on one of the thirds as well as the rainbow. Okay, so these are points of more dynamic composition. So if you can put your horizon or your subjects in one of these, what's called a PowerPoint, or on one of these thirds, your image will have more interest. Okay, so let's just accept that. So with just a couple of edits on the sliders and a crop, we've already got a much more powerful image. Right? Now the other thing I'm going to do is shift the color. The sky is pretty blue here, so I'm just going to shift it maybe a little more yellow, and that brings out the yellow in the sand as well. You can also try an auto, okay, white balance. Now this is a raw file, okay, so because it was taken with Olympus, it's an ORF file, but this is a raw file, so that allows me to pull this a lot farther than some of the JPEGs. Okay, so let's take a look at the before and the after. Right, so notice that when I did the auto white balance, it made it even more yellow. So I want to really enhance that sky and bring out more of the texture. Right, so there's a few ways you can do that in Lightroom. But first I'm going to darken this bottom area as well. Okay, a couple of little tricks. I've showed this before. And if you put your image upside down, Rob, if you could share the background article. If you put your image upside down, what happens is your eye will go naturally to the things that are going to draw your attention right side up. And right now, what's drawing my attention is that hut. Hopefully you're seeing that as well, because your eye will go to the areas of most brightness and contrast first, and sharpness. And the hut has all of those things. It's bright, it's sharp, and it has some contrast, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken the foreground and the hut. I'm going to do that with the graduated filter, so you can get to that by clicking here, or M on your keyboard. And then you get this little crosshairs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it up, okay? Again, you'll see these three lines, okay? So the wider part the lines are, the more fade. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create something really dark so you can see that. Okay, so the wider I make it, the more it fades from there to there. Okay, so it's a softer edge. Okay? But I want to have it sort of aligned with this beach. Okay, so I'm going to put it down here and try and align it with the beach. Okay, so I'm going to use minus exposure, okay, until I'm happy with how dark that is. About like that. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is do another one on the sky, because when I say I want to enhance the contrast and the punch of the sky, I don't want it to apply to the whole image. So what we're doing here with things like the graduated filter or the radial filter, which I'll show you in another image, is we're doing what's called local adjustments, okay? So it's only applying to part of the image. So again, I'm going to just make my spread. This time I'm going to bring it down to the bottom, okay, but I don't want to darken. Anytime you have something applied, if you've got some settings already applied and it comes in as a, whatever you did last time is applied when you start another one of these, just double click the word effect and it takes all of that away, it resets everything. So here I'm going to use the clarity slider. So see what that does? Look at the sky. Okay, so it really gives it a lot of punch. Be careful with the texture slider, because when you use texture, okay, what happens is you end up with a lot of grain as well. Okay, so I'm going to keep the texture slider down. Okay, I could even put some denoise in there a little bit. So I'm denoising the sky. Okay, so that's not bad. But the clarity has really done a nice job of bringing those clouds out. Right? And I might even go to highlights and increase them. So watch what happens if I increase the highlights or the whites just in the sky. It's creating more contrast in that sky area because I'm brightening the whites. Okay. Finally, I might do one more at the top here, because I want the top of the sky, double click effect, I want the top of the sky to be darker, okay? And that just helps keep people's eye in from going out the top of the image, right? So I've now got 3 of these little graduated filters applied. Let's see what happens when I turn them off. So see how bright the foreground was before I started and the hut, and now the sky has more of the attention, okay? I'll probably just take this back a tiny little bit. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is fix that hut. Okay, so that one I'm going to use a radial filter. Okay, you can get to it up here by clicking here or Shift M. Okay, so when that opens, You see, it's already applied minus 100 highlights. You get the crosshairs again, but now when you click and drag, it's going to make a circle. Okay, so I can make it more round, and I'm just holding my mouse button. Okay, so again, I'll make it darker so you can see where it's applying. If you do the invert, it applies to the opposite or outside the circle. Okay, so it naturally applies inside the circle, but if you go invert, it will apply outside. Okay, so notice that's doing a really nice job on the hut, but it's still a little bright. Okay, so there's an easy fix for that. I'm just going to right click on the dot and do duplicate. Okay, so now it's done a second one, and you can see what that's doing, and it's lowering that hut. Okay, I might even lower the contrast of it a little bit, and possibly even the saturation, because I want the sky to be a bit more powerful than the hut. So let's do another before and after. Okay, so that was completely edited in Lightroom. Now I could go a lot farther. I could get into the HSL panel here again. Now remember what I talked about in Luminar is I had the ability to mask that in Luminar with the color tool. I don't in Lightroom, okay? And even if you go and use one of the local adjustment tools, right, you don't have the ability to use HSL in those tools, okay? So it's a little bit more limited. Okay, let's hop back over here and see if there's any questions. Dramatic change, yes. Any questions? If you have any questions, do pop them into the chat. And if you're watching this video as the replay, feel free to add a comment. And if you have any questions, I will answer them there. Okay. So I want to move and do something a little different with a person image. And I do want to show you this one that I did with the sky. So I'm not going to get to as many as I thought today. I thought, well, yeah, we'll do 12 images. And I think I was a little overambitious. You know, my eyes were bigger than my stomach, as they say. I have a little coffee. But I'm going to probably go an hour and a half or so today. So if you want to stick around, I'll do an intermission after this one. So we can have a bathroom break, or you can refresh your coffee, ask any questions. Now, this image is a lovely lady in Peru taken by Diana Allen, who was with me in Peru, and I think I have a pretty good idea where she took this image. She was on my last Peru tour. So if you're if you're watching live, Diana, put something in the chat so I know you're here. If you're watching later, I've done some pre-edits on this image already in Lightroom. So what I want to show you is how to use Lightroom as Luminar as a plugin on this one. So let's take a look at the original image, because the original image was quite light, so it was a little bit overexposed, and there was lots of bright areas. Okay, so remember when I talked about, let me just go here and undo. So I'm just going to do a reset. Okay, so I cropped the image and I got rid of a lot of those bright areas to start. Because when we look at the image upside down again, okay, where does your eye go? Okay, if you want to tell me in the chat, where does your eye be drawn in this image? Anybody? Okay, my eye goes to this bright area here, and to these boxes and bright areas in the background, okay, as well as to all the bright beads and things on her outfit. And then if you dig in even farther, there's little holes in the background coming through the lighted area there, okay. Janet says white area. Yes, exactly. Okay, so you really want to think about those things, and this is a trick. Looking at your image upside down when you're processing it is a trick that I used when I was traditional retoucher, like years ago with film and paper, when I was retouching with dyes. Okay, so what I did here, if I'm just gonna undo this, oops. Apparently I'm rotating again. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so what I did to solve a lot of these things, and I think I've gone too far with the darkness. So I did some radial filters. So I'm just going to turn this on. So everywhere you see these little dots, okay, that's a radial filter. So I'm darkening these highlights, okay, using the radial filters like I showed you on the hot. Okay, over here as well. Okay, so if I turn the radial filters off, you can see what it looked like before. Okay, so I used one on her clothing as well. Okay, and one trick I'll show you on this one If you want to see where it's applying, right, you can hover over the dot and you'll get this little overlay. Right? If yours is not showing green, there's different overlay colors. So if you click O on your keyboard, the overlay will show up, right? But if yours is showing a different color, hold Shift and just keep pressing O. Okay, now it's white, now it's black, now it's red, now it's green. I use the green because it's kind of neon and it really kind of stands out against most images, especially if I'm doing face. This one you'll notice that the circle comes across into her clothes, and what I did was I used the brush on this one, okay, because you can actually apply a radial filter and then brush, and I just erased the part that was on her, right? And I could do the same up here if I wanted to erase it, and you can see that the overlay or the green bit is going away, right? So that's how I did that one, right? I applied a darkening filter or darkening one to the outside of the circle to darken everything. And if I wanted to erase a little bit, make sure I'm not getting her face because I want to keep her nice and bright. Okay, so let me just keep erasing here. Turn my opacity up a little bit. So I did want to darken her hat a little bit, but it's so colorful and interesting that I want to make sure that I keep details in it. Okay, so I want to keep this part bright, but I'm going to let it fall off to the darkness down below, okay? Because again, I want to keep the edges of the image darker so that the viewer's eye comes into the center of the image, right? Can you see the difference when I turn that off? The bottom part here is really light as well versus on, okay? So that's what I've done so far, right? The other thing that I might do in here before I hop over to Luminar is give it a little bit more warmth. And this is a RAW file, I do believe. Yes, so this is a Canon RAW file, right? Shot in aperture priority, so settings look good. Okay, so I'm gonna warm it up a little bit. So you can try again, auto white balance. Oof, no, that's no good. Okay, so undo is just Command or Control Z or Z if you're Canadian or American. So I'm just going to use the slider here. Okay, so temp slider goes from blue to yellow. So the more I go to the right, and Lightroom has actually now colored it so you can tell. So the more I go to the right, the more yellow, left is more blue. Okay, so I do want to warm her up a little bit, okay, because she has a nice warm skin tone, and all this wood in behind here should be warmer, okay. Maybe a little less pink. So the tint slider goes from green to magenta. So I'm just going to take a little bit of magenta out. Okay, so our before, and I'm holding the backslash key in Lightroom. Okay, so before and after, they don't have a nice little slider in Lightroom. Okay, now you could be actually done with this image. I'm going to do a couple of more things. I could apply a vignette, okay, and that's done under the effects panel, right? So I have applied a vignette, so you can see that it's darkening the edges. I have a lot of presets that I've created myself, right? Vignettes is one of them. Okay, so if I just undo this, I can show you how quickly I can just apply my vignettes. And just by hovering over them, you see what they are doing, right? So I don't actually mind the strong one. The challenge with Lightroom vignettes, though, is it goes in the middle of the image. You can't off-center it. So that's why I did that radial filter on her and darkened it off-center, okay? When you're using the vignette tool in Luminar, you can actually position it. So it's more like a radial filter. One of the other things that I always recommend that you do for pretty much all of your images is to go to the lens corrections and turn on the remove chromatic aberration and enable the camera profile. Okay, so what it did was it recognized, you'll notice, it recognized that she had a Canon 18 to 135mm lens, and it filled in a couple of things. It took away the distortion that that lens produces at that focal length and any edge vignetting, right? So I recommend doing both of those, and if you don't like what the profile corrections are doing, you can just turn that off or you can adjust them down here. So now we're going to just hop over into Luminar using it as a plugin, okay? So I'm going to do right click, edit in, Luminar AI. So now I'm going to make sure I edit a copy, okay? Now, normally I would do a TIFF, but for speed and just making a smaller file so I can work with it, I'm going to go to JPEG, because what I want to do in Luminar is apply a bit of a style, right? So again, all of these things that I'm doing, you can probably do in Lightroom or in Photoshop, but it takes more time, right? It takes more time, it takes more effort, it takes more education. I'm going to apply something called a LUT, or color toning, okay? So my computer is running out of resources because I'm filming all this at the same time. So the first thing that happens when your image opens is it's going to suggest some templates for you, right? And I could go monochrome on this one, but she's so brightly colored and her outfits is so brightly colored that I don't really want to go there. So I'm just going to check a couple of the ones that I have favorited, right? So these are some that I know that I've used in the past, and you can simply just click on them and see what they do, right? So Toscana was the one we used on the landscape. Now that one's actually kind of nice. Fade. Okay, fade is not too bad, so it's giving it kind of an antique look. But I've got one that I actually created that I think will work well. So that's going to be under my templates. I created one called Turkish Faded Sepia Look. So this is one that I applied on a Turkish fellow's image. And wow, okay, I really like that. Okay, so I can apply that, or I can dial it back using this slider here, right, and give it a bit more color. Or I can go in and adjust each of the things separately. So even when you apply these templates, you can still go and edit them. Okay, so remember that anything that's been applied has a dot next to it. And the one that's giving us this color is twofold. Okay, so it's under toning, which gives me, allows me to do, it's like split toning. So in Lightroom, it used to be called split toning, and now they call it color grading. Same kind of idea here. You can affect the shadows or the highlights. Okay, I've affected the shadows with a yellow tint. You can see what it's doing there, which gives me that sort of sepia tone look. And I've also applied what's called a LUT. That is the mood tool inside of Luminar. And I'll just turn this one off, and you'll notice that it's even called sepia, right? So you can see what that's doing, right? And you can change the saturation or how much this is affecting, right? Or I can also mask it, right? So remember I said I can erase it from anywhere. Let's say I want a little bit more of the red coming through. So I'm going to make my brush bigger, and I'm just going to paint with a lowered opacity. I want a little bit more color in her hat, a little bit more color in her outfit, and a little bit more skin color. Okay. So now I've just masked it so that it's less applying on her than it is on the background. Okay. So a couple of clicks literally here was a template and a couple of adjustments, and I'm happy with that. Okay, one thing I do want to show you is this Portrait AI in Luminar. So these are things that you can use on people photos. It recognizes the face. Okay, so this one is actually really cool. Okay, so face light is like adding a reflector onto the face, okay, or adding a flash. So if you ever get an image where the face is dark, you can literally just dial that up. But the cool thing about this is, let's take it too far on purpose, right? You can then increase the light on her face and decrease the overall exposure. And now look what's happening. I've got her face the right darkness, and the rest of the whole image has now dimmed. Okay, so it's kind of like adding a really custom vignette to the image, very simply, just using that light face light slider. I'm going to dial it back a little bit, and darkening the whole image. Okay. We could make her slimmer if we want, but I don't want to do that. She's a lovely lady all by herself. Right. Another little trick I want to show you is the Iris AI. Again, you can do these kinds of things in Lightroom. You can lighten the eyes, but you cannot change the eye color. So a little trick that I use here inside of Luminar is if you dial the iris visibility up, it's supposed to be lightening the iris. But often with people that have really dark, almost black eyes, it doesn't really work so well. So what I do is I change the eye color to brown, okay? Because clearly she has brown eyes, And now you'll notice that it is picking up and lightening. So I can increase the flare a little bit, or I could even choose honey, which is kind of a golden color. Oops, not cat eyes. Wrong one. Okay, honey, and that's kind of a nice golden color, which also goes with this sepia that I've done. Right, so you can see what's happening here with the eyes and the face. Okay, so it's brightening her up. And I've also enlarged the eyes a little bit, which that preset was doing, but I'm going to dial that back also. Okay, so if somebody is really squinty, you can open their eyes a little bit with that. So I'm pretty happy with that. I love her color, and it looks like it's a 100-year-old picture, right? If we wanted to take that another level, something else you cannot do in Lightroom is add a texture. In the local masking tool here, I can add a texture overlay, right? And I just have to go and find it. So you have to load a texture. Now I have some of my own textures that I've created. I just have to find them. Texture pack, there we go. So right now I have a Cubro texture pack. So if you want to play with these kinds of things, and I'm just going to try and pick one that I think might look, I want it to look something like aged, right? Like the image, right? So I want it to look more old. You might want to find one that's like paper. This one might be kind of cool. Let's try this one. And when it applies, it comes out at 50% opacity. If I dial it up to 100% opacity, you can see that now the texture takes over. Okay, so I'm just going to put that back and change the blend mode. Okay, so usually I'll use overlay or soft light or lighten. Okay, let's try one of these. This texture is not working for me. I might go find a different texture. Right? Sometimes you have to play around with textures to find just the right one. Right? If you are a Luminar X member, that's something else that they have on sale right now. You can buy the Luminar X membership this weekend, the Easter sale that popped up. You can find that for, I think, $59. Right? So these are some PNG ones. When you get the Luminar X membership, actually, let's try the canvas. Right, so this is going to give it a canvas look. When you get the Luminar X membership, you get free resources and things every month. Oh no, that's kind of cool. So now it looks like it's painted on a canvas, right? So applying different overlays. I kind of like lighten, right? And maybe I'm just going to dial it down a little bit. And once again, you have a mask. So if I don't want it on her face, I can remove that texture from her face. Okay, so now it looks like it's been painted on a canvas, right? So if you want your image to have a painting look, you can do that. You can even increase the contrast of the texture once it's applied, and so on. Now it's very subtle. I like that. Right? So now, once I'm done, you'll notice that before I had export, now I have apply. So once I click apply, it's going to think about it, and it's going to bring that image, this new processed image, back into Lightroom. Okay, and then I can continue editing in Lightroom if I so desire. Okay, and then bada bing, bada boom. Okay, there it is. Okay, so now you can see the original. Okay, this is the one that I brought from Lightroom into Luminar, and the edited version. Okay, so I could have done a very similar sepia type of look, but I couldn't have done that texture overlay in Lightroom. Okay, so there's a few things that Luminar does that Lightroom cannot do. Can I use more than one texture at a time? Yes, you can. So where I went to the local adjustment tool, Nancy, you just add another one. So yes, you can. And you can also now use it to add a watermark. I'm going to be making a video on that shortly as well, on how to apply a watermark, whether that be your name or an image overlay. Okay. The histogram is stacked up on the left. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to go back because you're asking the question about this histogram. So what it's telling me here is I've got the histogram stretched out. So I have something that's white, something that's dark. But what it's telling me is there's a lot of stuff that's darker than medium gray in this image, right? And that's that background. So all it's telling me is that there's a lot of dark, right? And that actually that represents this image correctly, okay? What's Janet's question, Rob? Where's Janet's question? Oh, that's the one I just answered. The histogram. Yes. Okay. So if there's any questions that I'm missing, let's take a 2-minute bathroom break. I'm going to put you guys on intermission. I'm going to top up my coffee and take a bathroom break, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, I am back. So I wanted to do some different ones now. There was an image that was submitted by Lucien that is a fabulous street photography image. So if you attended the webinar that I did with James Mayer a little while back, he talked about street photography, and I thought this one would be a great one to play with in black and white because of this mural in the background. So let's take a look at the original, right? So the original, I haven't done much here other than darken the edges so far and tone down this area here and the tree. So I've done that using some of the tools that I demonstrated earlier, using the radial filter and the graduated filter, right? So other than that, I haven't done a whole lot, right? The person is now highlighted. I might scale this one back just a little bit. You can see my edge darkening here. I want to make sure that they There's some separation between their feet and the ground. Perfect. But the lighting here is absolutely fantastic. So if you're watching this, Lucienne, great shot, okay? The light coming in from the side, the person on their phone, right? She's looking at her phone. She's got the mask. So it's really indicative of, you know, our times currently. Also being by yourself and being separated, being isolated. So this is a great example of a really storytelling street image, and this mural in the background is fantastic for doing some black and white conversion. Okay, so if you are using Lightroom to do your main editing, right, you're going to be going up here to black and white. Okay, so you want to switch it to black and white. Don't use the saturation all the way to the bottom, because what happens is you can't control the colors. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this image. Okay, so you can make what's called a virtual copy by command apostrophe. Okay, and what that's done is you can see that there's now two thumbnails of this image inside of Lightroom, but I haven't duplicated the original. I've just made another thumbnail. Okay, so what I'm going to do is do one where I've desaturated, and I'm going to show you the right way to do it. Okay, change to black and white using this treatment up at the top here. Okay, you can also go in and see if your camera profile, okay, so let's see what kind of camera he's using. So NEF is a Nikon, okay, so Nikon D7D, right? Great image, good exposure, everything looks good. But when you are inside of Lightroom, you can see that these camera profiles, okay, these are what's called the profiles up here, okay, profile, okay. Click the little squares to open this, and then look for camera matching, because if your camera is recognized by Lightroom, okay, you'll see different profiles that come with your camera, and these are similar to the ones that you would find inside your actual camera. I know with Fuji, I have different ones like Velvia and so on. Okay, so if I wanted to punch up the colors, we could see what these do. But you can see that there's also a few different monochrome ones. So just by hovering over it, you can see that choosing the different ones, look at the colors in the mural, well, the tones in the mural are shifting, right? Based on, you know, what the original looks like. So I'm going to just choose a basic monochrome for now, okay? And then we're going to go down, oops, I need to go choose Adobe RAW one, I think. Okay, so I'm going to choose the Adobe RAW monochrome because I want to be able to have this panel active. Okay, so you see when I chose the camera one, the camera matching one, it obviously is removing all of the color data, and that's not what you want because I can't edit the colors or the tones. Okay, so see how it's grayed out and it says monochrome profile applied. Okay, so I don't want to apply that one. I want to apply the Adobe one because now when you go down to this black and white thing here, it shows me the sliders. Right, now you'll notice that when I go from one panel to the next, it closes the one that I was on and opens a new one. And the benefit of that is that you don't have like a whole bunch of panels open and you have to scroll all the time. Okay, if you don't have that in your Lightroom, just right click over the word itself. Okay, so not here. Okay, actually it does work here. So click over the panel like this on one of these and make sure that solo mode is checked off. Okay, so if I untick it, now you'll see that when I open these, they all stay opened. Okay, and it causes a lot more scrolling. Okay, so I like to keep my desktop nice and neat and just be working with one thing at a time. So when I open a new one, it closes. Okay, so like nice little Lightroom trick there. Okay, so now we're going to work with the black and white tones. Okay, so if we want to see the original image, let's do a reset on this one. Okay, so if I want to see the original image, what I want to do is I want to start with this one. And I'm going to copy all the settings. And then put the saturation back. So I want to replicate the same cropping and lighting. Okay. And then I'm going to go into the black and white here. Okay. So when I have this original color image, it's not showing me the color image. All right, so if that happens to you, see, this is great that these things happen. So I want to, let's go back here. I can change this in my history Okay, copy these history settings to the before, because what it's doing is it's showing me the before as the created virtual copy, which was in black and white. Okay, so now I've shifted that so I can see the color image. The reason I've done that is that I want to see the colors in the mural so that when I'm adjusting these sliders, I can decide which ones to dial up or down. And this is where you really have to experiment. So red up or down, you can see that that's affecting the lady's face, okay? So you want to be careful with that. Orange is going to affect her skin tone as well. So it's affecting the original colors in the image, right? See how she's got a really bad sunburn now. Okay, so you want to make sure you don't do that. The other way to adjust these is this little targeted adjustment tool, okay? So this guy here, I don't know if that zooms in, I don't know if that works or not. Maybe it does. Click this little targeted adjustment tool, and then wherever you hover over on the image, you get this little crosshairs thing. So if you drag down, it's going to darken those colors. You see that affected aqua and blue, okay? Or up, it's going to lighten them, okay? So actually darkening, look what happened. It added a lot more contrast to the mural, okay? Let's see what happens if I do this one. Okay, that's more aqua and blue. Let's see what happens with the magenta and purple. Oh, that looks nice, brighter. So really all I'm doing is trying to create more contrast in this image in the tonal range of the mural itself. Okay. Let's try, yeah. Okay, so yellow. Do we have any yellow? And I'm trying to be really cautious about the orange and the yellow because of her skin tone. Okay, so I don't want to adjust her skin tone. So let's see what this is doing. Okay, so that's what it came out as just with the base monochrome version. Now is my adjusted version. And I think I might go and darken the tree a little bit more because now the tree is really standing out. Right? Now what I can do is I'm going to show you a little trick here. Okay, so I want this tree to be a lot darker, but I don't want to darken the stuff around the tree, and you can see that it's darkening the wall also. If you're using any of the local adjustment tools, you can turn on what's called a range mask. So scroll down until you see this here. So I'm in the tool adjustments, okay? I'm in the masking area. Range mask is off. You can adjust by color or by luminance, okay? So I'm going to adjust by luminance, and I'll show you what that means, okay? So when I turn on this mask here, it'll be red. So that's where the oval is, and that's where my current graduated filter or my radial filter is applying, okay? But I don't want it to apply to the dark areas. I only want to apply it to the light areas, the tree, okay? So on this range slider, it matches up with your histogram. So this little triangle on the right is dark, okay? As I slide this to the right, look what happens to the red. Okay, so now it's not applying to these dark areas anymore. It's only applying to the light areas. If I do it the other way, it's going to take it away from the light areas and only apply in the dark areas. So this is a way to use the radial mask or the graduated filter and really sort of dial it in so that it's only applying to the minimal area you want. So if I turn that off, it's still applying a little bit outside the tree. If that's the case, I could probably just mask that one a little bit with a brush or just paint it out. I'll make sure I get erase. Smaller brush. Now, if I was doing this, I would probably zoom in a lot closer. Right? Turn on my mask so I can see where I'm painting, because I don't want to hit the tree. So I'm trying to just get rid of the stuff that's green next to the tree, but not paint over the tree. Okay. You can also change the, remember I changed the fading of the brush, so I have a harder edge brush now, so I don't get overspill. So when your brush is softer and you're trying to paint like this, right, I can zoom in and do a much better job. See that? So now I'm just erasing it from these outer bits here, okay? Like that. Okay, let's turn the mask off. Okay, and now I can just see, okay, if I dial my tree down a little bit. Maybe take the contrast down as well. Okay, so the tree is still showing up fairly bright, but I've minimized it a lot. Okay, so now let's take a look at the difference between these two black and white versions. right? So the one on the left was just strictly desaturated, okay? The one on the right is we're using the black and white mix, and I'm allowed to adjust the tones of the original colors because the colors are still there, right? So Lightroom knows what color those things were, and you can adjust the tones individually. Look how much contrast I've added to the mural just by using that, right? One other thing we can do is I mentioned the toning that I did in Luminar, okay? We can also do that here with color grading, okay? So that's the new tool. If you have an older version of Lightroom, it's probably called split toning. So you can apply to the shadows. It will not show up until you can dial this hue all the way around you want. It's applying different colors, but you won't see any color until you turn up the saturation. So what I do is I turn the saturation up way high, and then I dial it to the color that I want. So I want something sort of, right, you can make a blue tone, you can make a sepia tone, but I'm going to do what's called a split tone this time. So I'm going to drag it over to blue, and you can play with the color, drag it around on the circle as well, but I like that blue, right? You can also adjust sort of the saturation of it this way, right? You can also increase the overall brightness of it, but I'm going to leave that. So I like this blue on the shadows. I'm going to leave that. Then I'm going to go to the highlights. That's this one. And I'm going to choose a warm tone. Okay, so saturation up again. And I want to drag this over towards more yellow. So this is what's known as a split tone. Right? Now you can also affect the balance. Okay, so going this way is more of the highlight tone or yellow. Going this way is more of the shadow tone or blue. Somewhere about there. Okay, so I see there's a question. Do you typically do a sky placement first or later in the process? So in the case of Phil's image, Blue Jay, which I believe that's Michael, in the case of Phil's image, I knew right away that I was going to do a sky replacement, and I do that first because the sky replacement and the sky that I choose affects the tones in the image. So by adding that pink sky, it affected everything else, so I did the sky first. Another question, what drives my decision to go to black and white? You love the light play in the color image. Okay, so the light play is still here in the black and white image, but I chose to go to black and white because the original, if we go back over here, the original one, okay, the color really draws your eye. So remember I talked about things in the background that will draw your attention? Okay, let's do a little trick. Let's look at this one upside down. And look at this one upside down. Okay, so if we just minimize here. Okay, where does your eye go in, oops, in the color one? Okay, where does your eye go? Okay, your eye does go to her, but then it goes to the wall, right? Because your eye is drawn to 4 different things. It's drawn to bright areas, okay? So the bag and her face are the brightest things, so you go there. It's drawn to areas of contrast, again, her. It's drawn to sharp things, so pretty much everything in this image is fairly sharp, so there's nothing that's going to draw my eye away from something else based on sharpness, okay? So that's why often portrait photographers use a very shallow depth of field. And the 4th thing is color or bright color, okay? Because she's fairly monochromatic and dark, the last thing that draws my eye is the wall. So my eye keeps going back and forth between her and the bag and the wall, okay? Now let's look at the black and white version, okay? A lot of that is now gone, okay? Because we've gotten rid of that. Actually, I'll go back to this one. We've gotten rid of that, okay? Versus the color one, which is drawing a lot of attention. The wall is now minimized, okay? I hope that answers your question. I agree, it is a fantastic photo. I love the light play here, totally, right? And I find that the light play works as well, if not better, in black and white. So for me, black and white is all about tones and lighting. And when you have an image like this, immediately when I saw this image, the first thing I thought of was black and white. Because she is the subject not the wall. If I wanted the wall to be the subject, I probably would have left it in color, right? And I could do things like, again, if I was doing this in Luminar and did the black and white conversion, I could mask it so that it was only partially black and white, or I could have some of the colors show through. Okay, so it's very difficult to do that in Lightroom. I have very minimal adjustments that I could do to do what's called selective color or a faded color. You can just lower the saturation a little bit, that's all. Okay. So to go back to the one that we did originally with minus saturation, look at the big difference, right? So lots of different tonal ranges in the other one, right? So look at this little sort of drawing here. When I switch to the other one, you see lots more contrast and shapes. So I chose to move the sliders to the place where I got the most sort of, I don't want to say contrast, but contouring in the wall so that I can see the difference between the different painted areas. All right. So yes, very fun image, Lucienne. Thanks you for sharing that one. I'm going to go back to, Luminar, I think, because I do have Blue Jay's image. Where's your image, Blue Jay? This one. Okay. This one is a really cool image as well. So I'm going to take this into Luminar. I played with it a little bit in Lightroom, and there's really not a lot I can do with it in Lightroom, but I think I could do some really funky stuff in Luminar, which I already have applied. So there it is. Let's wait for it to open. Okay, so again, you can see that I have applied a preset or a template. One other thing I want to show you inside of Luminar is that it does have a history panel, right? And you can go all the way back to the original, right? And any of the steps along the way. And you can see that what I did was I applied a preset, I believe, somewhere along the way here. Somewhere along the way I applied this preset and I can't find it now. I'm going to go back here. Where are we? Okay. So what I've done here is I applied this Morning Dew preset, and I can undo everything if you want me to show you how I did this from the beginning just by clicking original, and this will go back to the original. Okay. So first thing I did was I went to templates. So Luminar will suggest a set of templates for you based on what it thinks is in the image. Okay, so you hear it's suggesting natural skies, landscape, and scenery. Makes sense to me, okay, because that's what it is, right? So it's done a good job of analyzing that, right? And I think the Morning Dew was the one I actually used. And all I did was I just started clicking through these because I had a vision for this image that I wanted to do something bluish, right? Now you can see that what's happening here when I did this one, that you start to see the breakdown again, and this is because it's a JPEG, okay? So if I had the raw file of this, Blue Jay, I could do a lot more smooth gradation here. It's breaking down because of that JPEG. So knowing that, I want to try and cover that a little bit. So the Morning Dew was the one I ended up choosing because it gave me this really sort of cool look. But you could keep flipping through. Sorry, my throat is dry, talking a lot here. You can see how quickly it works as well. Right? So a lot of these actually work very well with this image, but the one that I liked was the Morning Dew. So I'm going to start there and then edit from there. So then just click edit. Now the first thing I want to do is composition, okay? Because what's happening here is I feel like it's tilting a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit crooked. So the composition tool in Luminar is actually AI. Okay, so if you want Luminar to try and do your crop for you, just click this button and let's see what happens. Okay, so I find what happens is it crops, but it doesn't necessarily place it in the right place. So I'm going to move that over, and that's kind of similar to what I would do. And then I'm going to correct the perspective in terms, this one here is correcting the tilt. So I'm going to just click it and see what happens. Okay, so notice how it corrected that. Okay, And I like what it's doing, but I'm just going to take a little bit of the sky off. Okay, so it's a little bit more sky than on the bottom, but not so much sky. And then to accept it, just hit enter. Yes, I wondered where that was taken as well. So if you want to tell us, that would be great. Okay, now another thing that I want to do is clean up the image a little bit because there's a stick or something floating in the water, maybe like a duck over here, and you've got quite a bit. I want to show you what's going on here. You've got quite a bit of stuff going on in your image in terms of your sensor is dirty. So check your sensor because there's like a fingerprint or something here, okay? So you want to, I'm going to erase those, okay? So I'm going to use the erase tool like I did on fills. I'm going to zoom in. You always want to zoom in so that you can see what you're erasing. And then I'm using that square bracket key. I'm going to erase the duck. And I'm going to erase this stick. And I try and do a couple of things at a time with the erase tool. Don't do too much. Let it think about it. If you do 10 different spots and it does 8 of them great and 2 of them as a miss, you have to undo. Okay, so if you don't like what it's done, just undo. But don't do too many at a time. Okay, so now I want to get rid of this blobby thing over here. So it should do a good job on that. Wait for it. Are these templates native to Luminar or were they created by a third party? They're native to Luminar. You can create your own and some come with it, but you can also get more if you are a Luminar X member. They send you like a new set of looks every month, and some of them I've downloaded lots of them and they're very good. So I close my erase tool. Yes, you can get more. They haven't created a way for me to easily export the ones that I've created yet, but we're working on that. And I'm working on creating my own set of looks that I'll have available for you as well. So now I'm actually going to erase these things in the water here too. Because I just find that they're sort of at the edge and a little bit distracting. So the erase tool does a really good job of analyzing. It's like if you use Photoshop, it's like the content aware tool. And I find that it does a better job than Lightroom's cloning tool, cloning or healing. Okay, so now just with a couple of clicks and some erasing, we've got this really neat sort of blue toned image, okay? I'll show you the vignette tool that I mentioned that you can move around inside of Luminar, that you can't do that in Lightroom. So my little trick for vignettes is turn the feather down to 0. And then you can see the edge of it. Okay, so what that means is the feather is how it gradates. So I'm not feathering it, it's got a hard edge. Then I can adjust the size, the roundness, and the position. Okay, so it gives me this little crosshairs. So I'm going to put the vignette more over here, maybe not quite so small. Then I'm going to put the feather back up quite high. So now you can see what it's doing. It's darkening those edges again, right? And maybe to scale it back just a tiny bit. Perfect. Let's see. Maryland, excellent. Okay, I'm going to undo this one. Okay, atmosphere. I'll go back to put this in. Atmosphere, what it's doing is it's adding like a layer of fog, which could work in this case. So it tries to analyze the image, and you can actually add layered fog, which is actually kind of cool. So the more you drag up the depth, I'll just show you what's happening. It actually comes forward in the image, right? So how cool is that? So maybe I will leave a little bit of fog. That's nice. Now I could do a sky replacement in this one, or I could add some birds or clouds, but I think for me it's very mystical and soft feeling, and I don't want to add any of that. But what I do want to add is what's called the structure that I mentioned earlier, but I only want it on the part that is the land and the this dock. Okay, so again, I'm going to mask it. This time I'm going to paint it in. Okay, so before I erased it from where I didn't want it, and how I decide whether I erase or I paint in is which part is smaller, because basically I want to do less painting, right? So the area that I want this to apply to is smaller than where I want it erased. Okay, so I'm just gonna go real quick here. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a couple of things. I'm gonna paint over the trees and the dock. Okay, notice I'm making my brush smaller when I go out to the dock. And then I'm gonna lower the opacity so that when I do the reflection, it's not quite as structured or sharp. Okay, so it's not applying as much. Now I'm gonna copy this, so I'm copying the mask. So I can use that mask on anything else. Okay, so if I want to apply some details, as in I want to sharpen it even more, okay, so I'm going to add some sharpening, but you don't want to sharpen the sky. So again, I'm going to take this to extreme to show you what happens. Okay, so when we are sharpening the sky, you start to get more pixelation in those areas. But if I do the mask and I paste in the same mask that I had before, okay, so now it's not applying to the sky. Oops. Now the mask is not applying to the sky, and we're only sharpening the same areas. Okay, so obviously I'm not going to go that far, and just about like that. Okay? So it's a subtle thing, but it brings those details out, because when I go to apply another filter that I'm going to do shortly, I'm going to be blurring the image a little bit, and it's going to keep those details in here. Okay. So my vignette's good, structure, light, all those things are good. Okay, so it is applying a lot, which is that morning dew. So you can see what it's doing. It's really giving it that blue and brightening it up. So it's giving it that really misty morning feeling. So we can dial that back a little bit if we want and adjust it. But what I'm going to add here is what's called mystical. This is a filter I love. So I'm going to take it to extreme so you can see what it does. It's adding this really sort of glowy effect, right? So if I wanted that to apply strongly, it really adds to that foggy, magical feeling, right? I think that's true extreme. I usually apply it around 30, but in this case, I find higher really works for this image. I could apply a film grain as well if I want, but I think I want to keep it soft, and the film grain tends to take away from that. Okay. If you want to undo anything, just slide the amount back to 0, or use this little back arrow, which basically undoes everything on that tool. Okay. So now let's look at our before and after. Okay, so before the image was very gray, and now I've turned it into this sort of glowy blue, right? I'm going to show you a couple of more tricks. So somebody asked about applying 2 textures. Yes, we certainly can do that. Okay, so we can go and apply a texture. I should have pre-selected some textures for you guys here. I was not thinking. So these are in my Cuba pack. So when I select one from this set, I have an idea of which one I want of this set. I want something sort of crackly. These are all from Cuba, so Cuba is full of texture. That one might be kind of cool. That one's kind of cool. Okay, so this one's got some blue in it already, which might be kind of neat. Let's try this one. Okay, so when you apply it, oops. When you apply it, like I said, it comes in at 50% opacity. Make sure you open the advanced settings, because that's where the blend mode comes into play. Okay. You can also flip the texture upside down. Okay. So if you would rather have it in a different orientation. Okay. Yeah, I don't like the darkness in the sky. Let's keep it down the bottom. So let's change the blend mode. Okay. So darken means that wherever the texture is darker than the original image, that's where the texture is going to show up. Okay, so you notice that it's only showing in part areas. Right? Multiply and color burn are similar. Lighten is going to show the texture only where it's lighter than the original image. So now you're just seeing the white bits. Okay. Overlay kind of is a combination. It adds more contrast. And what I'm going to do on this one is dial down the contrast, and actually just dial down the opacity of this one so it's a bit softer. You know, I don't like the saturation that it's adding, and it's adding a lot of contrast. Okay, so playing around with that one, not my favorite. Let's just change to normal. There we go, I like that better. Okay, so we keep the softness down, And as the same with any of the other tools, we can mask it, right? We can erase it from anywhere. So if I decide I don't want this texture over this land part and the lighthouse, I can erase it from there, right? Or if I want to soften this dark area down here, it's too much, right? That's pretty good. Okay, so now if I wanted to apply another texture, I'll just show you how to do it. You just close that one and add another one, okay? Okay, so I hope that gives you an idea of what to do with this kind of image and how to apply a texture. Again, something that you cannot do inside of Lightroom because that's a layer effect. Let me come back here and see if there's any questions. Looks like a painting. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. I don't apply textures a lot, but on an image like this where it's like very soft, you could definitely make it look like a painting. You could add, you know, something that has a brush stroke effect. That kind of thing would look really great. I do not teach Photoshop Elements, Janet, partly because it's not a program that I recommend. I actually did a review and a test of several different programs for beginners a couple of years ago, and that's actually why I landed on Luminar. I find that it's easier and it does more, and it's more flexible, and it's easier to get the same type of effects than it is in Elements. So I'm not a super fan of Elements, so that's why I don't have it and I don't teach it. So I only teach things that I use and that I recommend in my own personal workflow. Janet says she can see that image used with inspirational text. Yeah, like a poster or Dreamy Saturday, something like that. Yep. If you've had an earlier version of Luminar, they've made quite a few different iterations. This is Luminar AI. Now would be a great time to grab it. Maybe Rob put in a link to our 5-day editing challenge. If you want to do a trial, they currently do not have a trial of Luminar on the website, but if you do our 5-day editing challenge, you can actually get a trial because I'm an Skylum ambassador. So they've given me that to be able to give to you for doing the trial. So if you want to try it, go ahead and do that. But if you do it for the 7 days, you'll run out of the sale, right? So if you want to grab it while the sale is on, sign up for the trial today, and then you've got 3 days or so to test it before you have to make a decision and still get in on the sale, right? And if you miss the sale, just use our discount code at any time to get $10 off, which is Digital Photo Mentor. And you can also use our link as well to get to it. Any other questions? Any other questions, Rob, that I have missed? Okay. I think we're coming along quite well. I've done quite a few of these images now for you guys. Did that of Phil's. Is there anybody else that's here that wants to see their image edited? Anne, Ambro, are you here? If you are, if you're still out running errands, let me know. If you're out, she's not gonna let me know. I think I will do one more. This was another one that I worked on quite a bit in Lightroom and got a really good result using some radial filters, right? So I'm going to go down to my history panel. So let me show you how I edited this one. Okay, so the original is a little bit flat and a little bit overexposed, right? But the original is good. It's a JPEG, so I would have more latitude again with that sky as opposed to trying to pull things out. But what I've done here is I'm just going to show you all the radial filters that I applied. Okay, so I applied one here that you can see what it's doing. It's darkening the highlights and the exposure and increasing the texture and the clarity because I wanted to really bring out this waterfall. I applied one here that is actually lightening, so I've added the whites. So watch what happens when I get rid of the white. So when you increase the white slider, okay, it's like pulling up the brightest part, and really those trees stand out. Okay, so now I'm putting attention sort of in this valley here. Okay, this one I darkened the rock face here. This one I've darkened the entire valley in the background. Right, so if I turn off all the radial filters, you can see what it's doing. So it's completely shifting the focus from this back valley here to this front area. Okay. So you get to decide. Maybe that's not your intention if that was your image, but I find that the waterfall is a great focal point for this image. And then of course I did lots of darkening in the sky, and I did that with radial filter, and I also did it with a graduated filter. Okay, so you can see that I've applied that graduated filter, and I've used that range mask again so that it's only applying on the light areas, right? So I don't want it to apply to the mountains, right? So you can see that it's darkening the edge of the mountains as well, okay? So I don't want to do that. So if I go back to remove it using that luminance slider, okay? So this is one that I use a lot inside of Lightroom. I could also do it with a color if I wanted to apply it just to the blue part of the sky, okay? And is here as well as Jim. Okay, great. So let's take a look at those. Yes, the Christmas train was quite interesting because, Jim, you've sent a finished version that you've edited. Now I see you've done actually a really nice job because you've removed all of these wires here. I don't know if you guys can see that. So there was some power lines and this tree over here. So he's done some work to remove all of the power lines, which is awesome. And I think you did a really nice job, right? You got rid of a lot of sort of this part on the right, which wasn't really needed for the story. I might have cropped it slightly differently. I do agree with your cropping in terms of putting the train off center and it still has some space in front of it. But you might have wanted to play, I might have played with the composition more of a panorama. I don't want to get rid of that smoke, but even just something like that, right? But most of the work that you've done in terms of getting rid of that, all these wires, this would be something that I would definitely do in Photoshop because, like I said, Lightroom doesn't do a great job with cloning and healing. Okay? That's not bad, but you can tend to get in trouble with Lightroom and cloning. You have to be sort of really practical and try again and again. Okay, so see that one? That's not bad. Okay, so I got rid of the tree, but there's no way that Lightroom's going to do those wires, so I would either pull that into Luminar or Photoshop, right? If you were here earlier, Jim, I'm going to do this trick again where I do Shift, double click on the whites, and what that does is it sets the white point, right? So it stretched the histogram out a little bit just to make sure that it's touching the edge of the graph, right? So if I hold my Alt Option key, you can see that the sky is clipping if I go farther, and I'm just getting rid of the clipping. The light on the train is clipping, and that's fine, okay? I'm going to do the same with blacks. Okay, now it actually turned the blacks up. One thing to note, I do want to clip the blacks, okay, because adding more black is going to give you more of that color punch that you're looking for. Something else that is a common misconception is that if your image is underexposed, you want to crank the exposure slider. You'll notice that when I talked earlier about using the sliders, this slider here affects the middle of the histogram. Can you see that grayed out right here? Okay, so it's actually affecting the midtones more than the rest of your image. Okay, so if you want to stretch the histogram out, use the black and the white sliders first, and then if you want to brighten it overall, then use the exposure slider. Okay, so I do find this one could have a little bit more exposure, but I'm not going to go overall because I'm going to do it just to the train. Okay, I want to have more detail in the train, just as you have done on your edit. Okay, so I'm going to pull the shadows up. You want to be careful of going too far and doing things like an HDR image where you end up with something that looks like this. Okay, some of the questions that I had when people were submitting their images is how far is too far? Okay, this is too far. And then you might want to do something like that, you know, oversaturation. Okay, this is considered over edited. Okay, when you look at an image and the first thing you notice is, oh wow, okay, that's edited. Okay, if the first thing you notice is editing, it's probably overdone. Okay, so I'm just going to undo some of that. So you want to keep your edits a bit more natural looking, and especially the global edits are the ones that apply to the whole image. Right, so I haven't got anything clipping. Right, we've got lots of detail. We can go even a little farther with the whites. So all I've done so far is remove the tree and just brighten it up overall a little bit. Now I'm going to use that radial filter again. Okay, keyboard shortcut is Shift M. And I'm going to reset, double click effect. Now I'm going to use exposure. Okay, you can see that the exposure affects the terrain versus shadows, which tends to flatten things out, okay, and get more grain. So I'm going to use a combination of both, a little bit of exposure and a little bit of shadows, just like that. Okay, the other thing that I might do is increase the whites, and you'll see that what happens is that steam comes out more, okay? So when I do the exposure, it doesn't, right? You'll notice that when I pull this kind of just flattens everything out because I'm pulling up the midtones. But when you pull the whites, that steam really enhances, right? Excellent. So I like the way that that's coming along. Now, while I have the terrain selected, okay, you can apply more than one thing. So you notice that I've applied the whites, the exposure and shadows, but I could also increase the clarity and add a little bit of texture at the same time. I could also affect the color. If I want the terrain a warmer color, actually that's not bad, give it a little bit warmer color, right? Warm it up overall compared to the rest of the image, right? So that looks good. I'm going to add a little bit of clarity overall. Again, this is one you don't want to go overboard because it tends to look too crunchy, especially in the sky. Okay. And I'm going to apply one of my edge vignettes again. You can share a link, please, Rob, to our Lightroom presets. So if you're interested in the presets that I'm using for Lightroom, the ones that I've created are basic presets, things like vignettes, noise reduction, sharpening, skin tones, which I use quite a lot, and increase and decrease contrast. Okay, so if I want to use the increase punch in this one, right, so I can do contrast increase, or I can do remove haze, and those are just simple one clicks. Okay. Now I just noticed that there's a guy in the window there, and there's a little bit of noise happening in this image. So I'm not sure why it's noisy at ISO 200. On a Nikon sensor, shouldn't be so noisy, but we could do a little bit of noise reduction, and that's something that I have in my presets. So I have noise reduction low and sharpening landscapes low. When you're dealing with noise reduction, that's under the detail panel in Lightroom. If you go extreme with the noise reduction, I'm just going to turn again what's over editing. You'll notice that now the image is just blurry. Okay, so when you are doing noise reduction, it's trying to look for speckles and things, but when you take it too far, you end up with mush. Okay, so there's a fine dance between noise reduction and sharpening. And then if you take the sharpening too far, you end up actually sharpening the noise. Okay, so you have to be really careful. Whenever I'm using the sharpening tool, I also use the masking slider. So I'm going to take this to extreme again just to show you. And this Alt Option key, if you hold it down, right, it shows where this is applying. So right now it's applying to everything. It's white. But as I drag it up, you can see that now it's applying more on the trees and less on the sky. Okay, so I don't want to sharpen the sky because remember, once again, it's going to add noise in those smooth areas. So see how nice and smooth the sky is now, but over sharpening on the terrain. Okay, so what over sharpening looks like, I'll just zoom in a little bit more, is that. Okay, so we've got some artifacts, right, that's over sharpened. Okay, so I want to scale that back, and I'll probably scale the noise reduction back a little bit. So it's that dance between having some noise reduction and having some sharpening, okay? Because if you do too much of either, you're going to end up with a mess. Now this is one that I might actually do in black and white because I like the contrast, and when I switch it to black and white, I think that it's just going to give me a really cool old look again. So we could do the same kind of thing and apply that. Look at what happens when I apply the HSL in the sky. Okay, so notice how I did this in the black and white, but I want to show you another trick and go back to color for a minute. When we change it back to color, we get the HSL panel. Okay, so there's that luminance again. you have this targeted adjustment tool similar to what I did on the black and white image, but I can apply it to different colors. So I can actually grab the blues in the sky and darken it. So look what happens when I do that. Right? Be careful again that you go too far. You don't want to get these artifacts. Right? And I'm going to see if there's any magenta in there. You can even shift the color, okay, like we did before. So I can make purple sky, okay, so maybe it's the apocalypse coming. Probably not, okay. Or you can increase the saturation and give it a bit more blue, right? Just like that. Any questions? Yeah, I would try black and white on this one, Jem, because the subject matter is, again, dictates, right? So darken that sky down and then maybe add a little bit of that color grading. So the color grading gives me that sepia look. Now another trick for adding a sepia look is if you only add it to the shadows and not to the highlights, you get a cleaner sepia look, right? So let's do, yeah, more like that. So this is more of what I would call chocolate brown. Okay, so I'm just making note 58 is my hue. If I apply the same hue or a similar hue to the highlights, okay, it starts to look like yellow snow and yellow sky. So I generally leave my highlights almost clear when I'm doing a sepia tone. So then I have white highlights, but brown shadows. Okay. Would I adjust in color before converting to black and white? I would probably do a little bit of both. And you'll notice something funny when I go back in here. If I shift this color, okay, the temperature slider, notice how everything changes as well. Okay, so because it recognizes the original colors of the image, any color adjustments you make after converting to black and white with this method, you'll still affect the tones. Okay. You could even apply a texture screen on this one, Jim, as well, again, to give it more of that antique feeling. But that was the first thing that I thought of here, was that old times, right? Okay, so let's have a look at one of Anne's images. She's got a couple as well. So we looked at Peru earlier. Anne is a lady who has come on many tours with me and Daniel. How many are you at now, Anne? Like 5? I think Anne Nickerson is one ahead of you. Okay, so this was taken in, I'm going to say Trinidad, Cuba. And this was the tour we did last January. So this was before all the craziness started. It was literally the last tour that we ran for our company. Okay, so I'm pretty sure this is Trinidad because of the cobblestones and the colored houses. Okay. Yeah, she's done more workshops too. Okay, so the first thing that I see here is the colored houses and the girls. Okay, so remember I talked earlier, you may have missed this because you were out, is I'm going to crop it. Okay, because what's happening is there's almost a third of this image that is road, and it's really not part of the subject. It's not part of the story. It is in some effect because it's cobblestone, but we don't need that much of it. Okay, it's not that big a part of the story, and it feels like I'm a long ways away from these girls. So just by getting rid of some of the foreground, it brings them in tighter. Okay, and keep these things in mind that if you are cropping your images to 50% of the image all the time, you need to get closer, okay? Bonus points for anybody. I'm going to let you think about this. No Googling, no cheating. Bonus points if you know which famous photographer said, if your images aren't good, you're not close enough, okay? Bonus points if you know that, okay? I'm going to get rid of some on the right here as well. And let's maybe go to there, maybe even more. Okay, so I want them to be slightly off focus, and I want this to sort of, recede down into the valley there. And do we really need the mountain areas? I haven't decided yet. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit off. It gives you a sense of place, so maybe I'll leave them. Okay, another cool thing that you can do is this leading to them, or is it leading you out of the picture? Okay, I'm going to duplicate this and show you a little trick on flipping the image. Okay. I'm going to flip this image. Where the heck are we? There we go. Flip horizontal. Okay. So now, does it look like she's going down the street and your eye goes that way? Or which one? Does your eye lead you to her or away from her? Okay. This is really kind of subliminal subtle message there. Okay, it's very subtle. Now I'm going to correct the tilt. So I could try in the crop tool, there's auto, which will try and correct any tilts. Okay, but I'm just going to go to a different tool down the bottom here, which I haven't done yet, which is lens correction. So remember my chromatic aberration. I want to turn those on. And then transform. Okay, so transform looks for if you have distortion looking up at buildings. Okay, so I'm going to try auto and see what it gives me. Okay, so it did correct the tilt. Or let's try full. Okay, so full is going to try and straighten all the angles, and you'll notice that it did sort of a perspective correction as well. So I don't want that per se, but let's go level and vertical, and now we've got straight up and down buildings. Okay, now that we've done that, I want to get rid of this little bit of orange on the right because that's the brightest area, remember? And I'm going to really focus in on these girls here. So I'm going to use my radial filter and I'm going to brighten them. Okay, so I'm going to increase the exposure on them, mostly on the girl on the street. I want to make sure that I can see her. So whites a little bit, exposure a little bit, shadows a little bit. Okay, because you don't want to end up with something like that. So again, that's over retouched because I can see that there's something happening there that doesn't look natural. There's like this inverted halo. Okay, so a halo, I'll show you that in a moment as well, is when you go too far, like for example, pulling the sky down. Okay, so going back to basics, I'm going to pull the highlights down. Let's check my whites. Okay, so go all the way to the right, bring it back a little bit, all the way to the left on the blacks, bring it back a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to pull the highlights down just to bring those colors down. Okay, we could play with the same thing in the HSL panel, right? Luminance, target adjustment tool, and then just darken this area. Okay, so be careful when you're doing that. You'll notice that it also saturated it. Okay, so that's yellow. So I'm going to just lower the saturation on that. Something like that. Because what's happening is the eye is going to the house, the really bright colors, and not to the girls. Right? So if I do the same with the sky, okay, I'm going to create a halo on purpose just to show you what happens. Okay, so that's really obvious, but can you see what's happening here? Okay, so that's what's called, like, that's a really bad halo, right, where you've got sort of this white outline. Okay, so I've darkened the sky beyond. Oh, you've got some kind of goblin up in the sky up here. That's kind of fun. Okay, so I'm going to undo that because I don't want to take it that far. So when you're darkening sky, you can use these blue sliders, but be very careful that you're not going too far. And yeah, what the heck? You've got something in your sensor there, it looks like. So I would either do a sensor clean, see what you got going on in there. So I just did a little cloning tool to get rid of that. Back in the lens corrections, okay, so remember I used the chromatic aberration. I'm going to turn these off just to see if we have any. Okay, so chromatic aberration looks like, now somebody's image had a lot of chromatic aberration. I gotta find it. It looks like a purple or a blue fringe, purple or green fringe. Okay? You can also find a fringe here, like if you've got an edge color, you can try and get rid of it, but it's not seeing it. Okay, so that's purely that it's pulling that sky down a bit too far, right? So we're getting closer, right? We're getting closer to having more emphasis on her, but I still feel like the sky is drawing a lot of attention. So I probably would have, when I shot this image, just got a lot closer, right? Because literally there's your picture, right? Do you agree? Does everybody agree? Why saturation over luminance? Oh, maybe it was a color of a tree. Okay. So why saturation over luminance when I was doing the HSL? And so luminance is brightness. Okay, so what I did was I dragged the luminance down to adjust the brightness. But when I did so, it also it affected the saturation. Okay, so I did a little bit of both. So I dragged one down and then I had to drag the other one down. Right. Yes, I do use a laptop, Janet. My laptop is the new MacBook Pro 16-inch, but I also have over here, which is why I keep looking over here, a 27-inch monitor that's plugged in as my secondary monitor. So you don't necessarily need to get a desktop. You could get a second monitor and do your editing on there. But I also have a device that calibrates my monitor, which is this guy. I'll come back on screen when I'm larger in a moment, and I'll show you that. That's something that you want to have. Maybe share our Amazon list, Rob, our Amazon main list. Or actually, there's a computer list. Share the Amazon computer list. And it's a device that calibrates my monitor so that the colors are neutral and the brightness is neutral. Because if your monitor is set wrong, okay, if you've ever had the experience of editing your images and then you post them online or you go make a print and they're too dark or they're blue or they're yellow or they're whatever, it's probably your monitor that's not calibrated correctly. Because if your monitor is set too bright, all your images are going to come out too dark because they look correct on your screen, but they're actually too bright. And that's why I also rely on the histogram a lot, because it tells the truth. Your monitor can lie, okay? So your monitor is a liar. We have 2 cats, and they're liars as well. They always lie about... they always tell me that he didn't feed them, and they tell him that I didn't feed them. So they always try and trick us. So we always check with each other. Did you feed these cats? Because they're telling me lies. Okay. Any other questions? Mona, yes, the recorded link will actually just be in the YouTube channel. So you're already on our YouTube channel. You can just come back there later. I do believe it has to process, so it'll probably show up as a regular video in our channel later. You can check it there. Okay. I'm going to switch back over here. Where are we? Okay, so I think we've done quite a good work today. I hope that's given you some good tips. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, please, if you enjoyed it watching this, whether you're watching it live or the replay. And we're going to be doing this again. So I still have quite a few images, including the one that I showed you at the beginning of Tom's that I didn't get to. I still have quite a few images submitted that I can still work through. But if you want to send some more, if you haven't already sent some images, the form should be linked to the form is in the description below, so you can submit your own images. Remember, please give me images that are already technically pretty good. Okay, so really overexposed or really underexposed, I can't really do much with. If the subject is drastically out of focus, if it's a JPEG that's really small, so make sure you give me your original camera files, whether that be JPEG or raw. Okay, and so I have lots of images to work on next week. I've got one from Rick that will be great. I played with this one in Luminar and I got something amazing in 2 clicks. You'll be blown away. I've got this one to show you how I corrected the buildings and so on. So I'm just giving you a little sneak preview of what I might be working on next week. I've got a lovely lighthouse image that we can play with. And something different from Lucien, another great image, great photography, something a bit more abstract. So I'd love to see, some macro or some more people images. If you've got some people images, send those in, and I'll see what I can do with them. Vivian, if you're watching this, I'd love for you to give this shot another try with some tips that I will give you for photographing it. If you're doing this type of idea, you want to make sure that the inside of the egg is actually clean. So break your egg and then wash it. I know it's kind of weird. And then make sure that your background is really clean, like you've got some spots and things here that we can clean up on editing. But if you just clean the surface, you won't have to do that. Okay, so this is a really cool idea, and I think it has merit for playing with. Give it a little more space at the bottom for the reflection as well, and then we can give that a go. So I can't do things like clean the egg. Your other image, Blue Jay, is I think an edited image because I don't have the metadata. So if you have the raw file from this, and I think I either stayed at that hotel or I know where that is. And I know that I did a lot of images from Venice as well. So if you have the original on this one, Blue Jay, Michael, I believe, give me the original on this one, so unedited, because I want to see what I can do, because there's lots of sharpness in here, but if you look, there's lots of highlights that are clipped. Okay, so the highlights here are overexposed, and you can see that it's not touching the black side as well. So that was my clue that you had edited this one. Okay. All right, let me get back over here. I'm going to close out my Luminar. Right, so a lot of these images, like I said, I'm going to work on in Luminar if I feel that I want to do more things and save a template. So if I really enjoy this one that I worked on in blue, I can just save that as a template and apply it to any of my other images as well. So let me get over here. Oops, I am off center. Give me a second here. I gotta fix myself. Let's go to this one. Okay, so I'm just gonna make myself smaller. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed today and got a lot out of it. If you could type something in the comments below the video or in the chat, tell me one thing that you learned today that you'll be able to use in your photo editing moving forward. I wasn't planning on doing 2 hours today, but we had lots of images and I tend to be, verbose with my explanations. So I hope that you got a lot out of it. I'd love to see some flower images, Janet. That would be great, especially since hopefully spring is hitting some of us very soon and we'll be seeing some flowers. That would be awesome. So please tell us what you learned today and tune in again next week. Submit some images, give it a thumbs up, and make sure you subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you again next time.